Hi, everyone. My name is Paris Pittman. I work at Google. I do Kubernetes community management here. This is our August edition of Meet Our Contributors. Meet Our Contributors is a very fast way for our current and also new contributors to get information that they would typically get from a mentor. Today, we are joined by several mentors of different backgrounds and different parts of the project, which will give us a good idea and experience level of questions, and they'll also be allowed to answer, or excuse me, ask each other questions. So panelists, please feel free to do that. Of course, we do have a code of conduct as well that we abide by that's under the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. So that would be anybody that's answering or asking questions. So please be excellent to each other. Now, how you actually ask questions. We have a Slack channel of the same name. It's Meet Our Contributors on the Kubernetes Slack instance. If you do not feel comfortable asking questions publicly, please feel free to direct message me. My display name is just Paris, like the city, Paris. Also, I will be watching Twitter as well, so I'll catch my DMs there. My handle is Paris and Bmore, like Baltimore. I used to rep that city for 33 years. Hi, everybody in 410. And then, oh, am I getting kicked out? Oh, almost got kicked out of my room here at Google. No, did not though. Anyway, oh yeah, Twitter. So if you would like to just do a status update to Twitter, just use the hashtag K8SMOC for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. So first things first, hello panelists. Thank you for joining today. We're going to do brief intros for all of you. Feel free to take up to a minute or so just to give a brief introduction, and then we're going to go right into the questions. Let's start at my top left, and that's Jeffrey. Jeff?
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Sica. I currently work at the University of Michigan. My title is Research Database Administrator Senior, which doesn't really reflect what I do a lot of the time. Right now we're running multiple different Kubernetes instances for research and academia. So that's my day job, but on the side I also do contributions to SIG UI, and George and Bob roped me into SIG Contrivex as well.
I liked that roped into.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. All right, and then next is Ben. Ben, you want to give a quick intro?
Hi, my name is Benjamin Elder. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I'm on the GKE Kubernetes InchProd team. So I work on the project automation a little bit internally for GKE, which is Google's hosted Kubernetes, but also mostly for the open source side of all the project automation and release tooling and whatever for Kubernetes.
Thanks for joining us today, Ben. I'm sure we're going to have testing related questions, and you have done an excellent job with helping that SIG and providing us with awesome tooling. So thank you. And then next is Tim. Tim, take it away.
Hi, I'm Tim Pepper, and I would echo Paris's mention there. I'm Ben. I appreciate the help you give me. I am a systems engineer by trade, but in particular open source. I've been doing open source for over 20 years, which gets crazy to say as I say that more and more. Happened to bubble up the stack where I had done things much lower in the stack towards firmware and embedded systems in Linux in my past, but have over the last few years gotten more into the cloud, and that naturally led me to Kubernetes more recently, and about a year ago. So I'm here and contributing and loving it. Oh, and I guess I should mention I work for VMware.
Yes, VMware pays the bills there.
Yes, and I appreciate them.
Tim, thanks for joining us today, and you're doing awesome things with the release team, which I'm sure we will discuss here shortly. So thanks again. And then Ruben, we met at KubeCon Copenhagen, so that was several thousand miles ago. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. So my name is, again, Ruben Erduz. I worked for Heptio, and my first job at Heptio was I was on the field, like as a field engineering, helping customers with all the things Kubernetes, installing, operating, best practices, etc. I moved away from that discipline, and now I've been working for about the last month and a half. I've been working as a software QA engineer. In particular, I've been trying to focus on upstream testing and in particular QADM and all the SIG cluster lifecycle with Tim and all the other folks in the company that are there as well. I'm again like super happy and content with the Kubernetes community, and hopefully I can provide some insight for those wanting to participate and partake.
Great. Thanks again, Ruben, for your time today. And then last but not least, George, on what I call our ones and twos, our VJ for the day, helping us out with our YouTube stream. George, you want to introduce yourself really briefly?
George, community manager at Heptio, and just streaming and doing all the stuff in the background. So if you've got questions, I'll help rope them in and stuff. Thanks for having me.
George also does excellent work with contributor experience, y'all. So if anybody on the line right now is looking for ways to enter the project, contributor experience is here to help you. They've done a lot of work with the contributor guide. We are going to stand up a contributor website shortly, and lots of really exciting work happening in this special interest group. And that actually leads me to the first question. What's a special interest group for those who are watching right now and are like, what's a SIG? Like, what are they talking about? Does anybody want to jump in?
So a SIG is a group that's managing a piece of, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could very well be wrong. A SIG is a group managing essentially code that is part of Kubernetes overall. So like there is SIG UI that is focused on the Kubernetes dashboard, which many people may log into and like view their cluster. But Contribx is kind of an interesting thing. You do have code, but it's more, website stuff. So SIG, yes, no?
Yeah, no, I mean, contributor experience would technically fit the mold of a SIG. We own docs as well as code and repos and artifacts and things along those lines. Tim, did you want to add to that? I saw you come off mute.
I think that's kind of the top level distinction around code ownership, but maybe more broadly, it's part of how the community organizes. Any large community has to figure out how to organize and split work, split responsibility, and do that in a way that has ownership and active ownership, so that you get maintenance and you don't end up with what people will call the tragedy of the commons. So it's a way of separating out who's doing what and giving a landing page for different technologies, and whether it's that initial contacts but if you're interested in networking, SIG networking is there, and it gives you a place to kind of attach and affiliate and feel home.
Yeah, I agree with all the definitions so far, but I think also, at least the way I understand that is SIGs are like the champions for that particular section, right? Like they're the advocates and champions. So like at SIG Node, they are not only the people who code the part that does the node, but they also advocate upstream whether they need to contribute with a different SIG, so like they champion also their causes and to making sure that things get done.
I would agree, and I would add to what Tim said that besides like the governance aspect, there is the I need to talk to someone about networking. How can I find someone? And these special interest groups help to kind of box people working on the project into like, well, this group of people is working in this area, so that might help you find someone to talk to.
And also worth the distinction that it's not the intent is not to silo people or silo teams. It's just a matter of like being able, as Tim mentioned earlier, like split up responsibility and that sort of thing. So like don't think of SIGs as being silos, but more of like, and like these people are good at this and they want to work on this type of thing, but it's not closed off to anybody, and it's fairly open to collaboration and contribute.
And as much as some of the SIGs sort of map to what you might think of as a traditional vertical, there's also horizontals. There's things that span all of these. So it's an organizational construct, but there's overlap and fuzziness, and they mutate. We have new SIGs that come, and we have some that retire as well. So this is a constantly evolving thing.
And while we're in the topic of explaining SIGs, if you all could kind of explain how that relates to a working group, I think it would help people understand the organizational constructs there.
I do want to follow one more note. When we're talking about the siloing, I think it's also important to note that not only is it not siloed, but people are involved in many of them. And in fact, some of the people that sort of run the SIGs run more than one SIG. And that's totally encouraged. We wouldn't want anyone to, force themselves to focus on one area.
And then to George's working group question, does anybody want to address what they think is the difference? Tim, I see you smiling.
I was wondering who was going to take this one.
I actually looked it up just in case.
Yeah, no, I also have a response. George,
What's the official word?
Why don't you answer your own question, George?
Yeah. So the way I see it, so SIG's own code, right? And a working group is more if you want a cross-disciplinary thing that's either for like a temporary goal, right? Like we need to accomplish this and we need involvement from these 4 SIGs. So you think of it as a Venn diagram, that's what that is, right? The Venn, yeah. The middle thing that has all the overlaps, that could be considered like a working group that has to interface with a lot of things to kind of force that horizontal workflow.
Yes.
And then there's also projects or sub-projects within SIGs, or maybe also working groups, but those are a little more local. So a distinction then being like if a work group, a SIG has something that's substantial and they want to have a focus group doing it, that maybe becomes a sub-project. But if that thing isn't just focus and scope to the SIG, but kind of has some breadth, that then becomes the working group area.
Yes, we use the word temporary too a lot. Temporary in our community right now is TBD, whatever that means, but not around forever, whereas a SIG's artifacts are indeed around forever. So that's the kind of the important, I think, concept there. All right. So we do have a ton of questions actually from current contributors, and they're actually around some similar concepts. One is maintainership. So this one is from Nikita, who does significant work with API machinery amongst other groups like Contributor Experience. Thank you, Nikita, for your contributions, by the way. So she still struggles to understand open source maintainership from the perspective of how do you become one, and then how do you also continue as a maintainer without burning out, especially if that's not your full-time job. So this is sort of a two-part question. So let's handle the first part, which is how do you become a maintainer? Ben, you're technically a maintainer. Tim, are you a maintainer? You're not. Are you a maintainer on other open source projects? I thought no.
Not technically at the moment, no.
Okay.
But I've got some experience in the area.
Okay.
I
Ben,
think
why don't you take that?
I think it's just sort of a natural extension of if you've worked in an area so much and that you've effectively owned something, at some point people declare, hey, this person owns this thing. We need someone to maintain it. We're going to say this person owns it. So with Kubernetes, you'll see that like, oh, this person kind of, I like the word Tim used earlier, championed building this area out. If they did all of that, then we'll go ahead and say, this person is a maintainer of this area, but other people can come along and make significant contributions, and eventually we'll recognize that like they should really be a maintainer of this. So I'd say there's 2 routes. There's either outright creating something and then de facto maintainership, or making significant contributions to something and then winding up becoming another maintainer.
Yeah, I'd echo that. The 2 main paths I've seen are like a project that I started, for example, or me and a set of people. We started out on a whiteboard trying to describe a problem and solve it, and ended up with something on GitHub eventually. And we were the ones who were the maintainers, the owners of the Git repo, that sort of thing, where there was an ownership aspect. More typically, what you'd see in the Kubernetes specific instance, I think, is that at some point your activity, like Ben was describing, is recognized and something becomes delegated to you, whether that's just the responsibility of being a reviewer on new code coming in, but that actually gets implemented by putting your name in an owner's file, which kind of really, in just plain English, says that you are part of the ownership of maintaining that sub area of code. And that really becomes an act of recognition.
And what if there's a current contributor and they have been contributing to the project for quite some time, and they are, at an approver stage, for instance, but they just can't seem to get to that level of maintainership because there's already maintainers there that are solid and they don't seem to necessarily be going anywhere. What is your advice to that approver to gain trust or to gain that next level of maintainership?
So we might not be entirely functional there, but I think that like if you have been making significant contributions, maybe you might need to poke someone and say, hey, I'd like to be a maintainer, if someone hasn't already called you out for it. But I would hope at that point we would just add you. I don't think there's any like super special way to like get around that. It's just I think Tim hit on something with the sort of de facto delegating. I think that's really the key thing, is maintainers are people that we can expect to delegate like maintaining something to. And if you've been doing that, then you should be recognized as a maintainer. If you're not doing that, then you kind of already aren't a maintainer, and then it wouldn't make sense to recognize you as one.
This may even tie into the second part of the question, because the current maintainer may be burning out without anybody around them knowing it. So as somebody aspiring to help out more, even just raising your hand and articulating that out loud could be a huge act, because it gives them a chance to say, oh, I didn't want to burden you, but can I delegate this particular thing to you because I really need help?
Plus 1,000 to both of you. I think the key, I think, is really asking and letting people know your intentions. That is a huge step in open source, especially because we all are so busy and sometimes in our silos, and you may not know what other people's intentions are or where they'd like to take their growth. So if you are out there and you do want to get to the next level, and whatever that next level means, whether it's a new contributor, a reviewer, an approver, a maintainer, etc., please let folks know who are decision makers that that's something that you're very interested in the future. All right. And then the second question, and to Tim's point about burnout, what are some strategies that you all employ that help you with managing either potential burnout, or have you ever burnt out, or tell us some stories? No strategy. Well, this is kind of the $1 million question. I'm not going to lie. I feel like we get this a lot. Open source in general gets this a lot. And I don't think I've never heard any one person have the same answer. So please feel free to be, off the cuff and give your own kind of, even if it's, hey, I've burnt out, I have no idea what I'm doing. Jeff, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I'm a developer by trade, not necessarily like a sysadmin, though that's kind of become a fair amount of my job. But when I first started out as a developer, like I taught everything myself, so it was super fun for me. So it was my hobby and my career. And then there was a point a few years in where I just could not think. Like you wind up staring at your screen and realize you've stared at your screen for 20 minutes and you've done nothing and you can't focus, and that's burnout. It's something that we all need to recognize and also like spread awareness. There's ways of doing that. The way that I wind up combating that is doing the exact opposite of what I'm doing. If I feel like I'm burnt out, I'm gonna go play a round of golf, or I'm gonna go play with my dog. I need to have clear separation. That's hard for myself and for a lot of us because we really enjoy what we do, but we have to try and have the cognizance to recognize it's like sleep deprivation and driving. Like we need a break. We need to give our brains a break. Even if there is a problem in front of us, maybe 20 minutes walking down to grab a cup of coffee is something that you just need to do to keep yourself balanced. It's all yin and yang.
I noticed looking at the video that a number of us possibly work from home as well. So that's something a little more common potentially in open source. And that can make it challenging to set the boundaries, because sometimes your commute hours just time box your time at work and give a little bit of physical separation. I have a friend whose wife actually made a fake little badging swipe machine and put it on his home office and made him wear a badge at home. And if he was wearing the badge in the house, he was somehow not at work and he was supposed to be in his office, and just trying to make some separation there. And I think I use that as an example to say, like, we have to actually cognizantly make some boundaries and then communicating them like his wife is communicating to him. But do that, you can do that with your community. So I have a coworker who is in a European time zone, and I've counseled him to suggest to the SIGs that he works with, like, hey, this meeting's at a bad time, versus just silently attending or missing it, or saying, hey, I want to take up this issue, but it's actually 2 a.m. I'm going to table it till tomorrow. So I think as a maintainer, it's important, or as any sort of a leader in our discipline across all of these time zones, is to communicate that type of stuff. Let people know a little bit about where you are, the struggles you might be going through, time balance, and that you do need to occasionally eat and sleep. And I do think people will respect that.
I would add, it is important occasionally to just shut things out for a little bit. And as something that kind of ties into that, I think for any non-trivial amount of code, it's important to, as much as possible, avoid being the sole maintainer. You really just shouldn't do that to yourself. There needs to be someone else around. Sometime you're going to be out, you need to take a break. There should be someone else lined up to say, they can do this for a while. Or trade off. I also don't think anyone who maintains very non-trivial amounts of code in this project has done it without doing it full time. It is just, you can't keep up. I think maybe a few have, and I am amazed by that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think there are a lot of good places that would be willing to hire someone like that, and that it might be worth looking for something like that, because it really is just extremely time consuming.
Yeah, I think just for contributing and being part of several different open source projects, I think that you have to, you have to set boundaries on your own. Like Tim alluded to this earlier, right? Like in the sense, like you says, like, these are my work hours, like I try to be flexible so that way I can encompass, people, let's say from the EU zone or whatever, but like, don't kill yourself, like trying to like please everybody. Don't kill yourself trying to like work on Saturday so that way you can catch somebody from like 7, time zones behind you or something, right? Like it's just, and I think everybody who has been in open source is very empathetic and very understanding of this. So like, I think is for your own, well-being and your own sanity. It just, set boundaries. Like, so it's like, if you cannot meet one day because that or whatever, if a team, somebody set a meeting, let's say like in the West Coast and you're in the East Coast, and you really need to like leave that day at 5 p.m. because you have things going on outside your work that is not Kubernetes, just say it. I mean, I cannot attend that meeting. I'm going to be out, right? So like you need to be very upfront and empathetic, because if you don't, what's happening, I mean, like that silence is going to come back and haunt you, because then people are going to count on you all the time to be in there, right? Like if you don't push back on things, if you don't, I mean, gently, and of course, like in the sake of the community, if you don't defend your own time, like people will unintentionally like assume that you're always going to be there. And then that's only going to lead to like people, quote unquote, abusing your time, right? Like it's just like, well, I schedule something at 7 p.m. because you always come up and you never say anything, right? Like, so I schedule something that maybe you already had different plans before that, right? So like, it's a matter of like, I think most of us in the community are painfully aware of how difficult it is to deal with a geo-distributed team, and especially Kubernetes that has, contributors from all over the planet. So like, set your own boundaries. And like you said, like, I'm only going to work from let's say 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and that's it. I mean, like, I will not work outside those things. That will not, absolutely not, in my opinion, should not hinder your ambitions or progression towards maintainership or anything, right? So like a lot of people think that putting more sweat equity will somehow get you farther there. In my opinion, that's not necessarily true. I think like with the quality of work, and especially if you have good people skills, you can like get anywhere that you want in any particular SIG that you want to participate or you want to lead.
Awesome. Those were really good responses. I heard a lot of communication themes in there, which actually we talked about too in the first question. So state your intentions and state your boundaries. That seems to be a reoccurring theme. But so tacking on to the boundaries piece, as someone that's actively involved in the project, it's like, what do you owe people? Like, what are our SLAs? Talk to us a little bit about like how you handle the influx of things on your plate from an actual day-to-day perspective. I hear that a lot. I mean, I hear the what do we owe the contributor as far as response times are concerned a lot. That's a lot of chatter right now in open source. Like, what do you owe people reaching out to you, especially when you might have, hundreds of people reaching out.
I think maybe "owe" might be the wrong way to phrase it. Like you should do your best, and that we should try to foster that sort of thing. But I think as soon as you're framing it as owing them something, you're just not like, I don't think that's sustainable. I think that's the wrong mindset. I think you want to foster a good community. I think you want to try to be responsive to people and things, but that like, the amount of incoming PRs or something is highly variable, and how many of them might come to you, and you can't predict like if you're actually going to be able to keep up.
So 1000% agree. And I'm fairly involved with folks in the Python community, and like off the record, I spoke with a couple of folks who maintain larger projects, and it is that mentality of ownership that actually is hurtful. Like, maintainers don't owe you anything, right? Like, it's just like you're participating, that's their project. They will be happy to make it, keep sure that project keeps going and keep moving, and see what your PRs are, etc. But like, they are doing it out of their own time, and most of us are doing it out of our own time. Like, sure, some of us get paid in a way indirectly to do this, but like, it's like I feel, framing it as a matter of like the maintainers owing something to the community, that feels like a bad frame of mind, in my opinion.
And that's exactly why I said that word too, because I hear that a lot. I hear people say, either I don't owe you anything, or people asking me, or not asking me particularly, but asking, what do you owe us as in return? So I wanted to make sure I included that word. So Ben, thanks for taking that bait. And George, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, even though someone might be paid full-time to work on a project, some things like Kubernetes are so complex and so large that it's impossible for one person to do that. So while we are fortunate to have lots of great companies sponsor the work and everything, that still doesn't mean that, that person works here, therefore, I feel like I can give them an incredible amount of work. We have to be cognizant of that as well. I just wanted to add that point there, because it used to bother me that I could never keep track of what's going on. And literally part of my job is to read everything that's going on and help people understand that. It's like, I should know this as much as but it's impossible. So the sooner you just say, there's no way I can do this on myself, and I'm going to lean on the team of people around me to help us all get there together. You're just immediately, you're in a different, better mindset, I think, than, oh no, I was gone for one day. Now I have no idea what's going on, and you're panicking and things like that. You just kind of accept your fate, I guess. I don't know.
Ben, did you have something to add? Or
Yeah, I was gonna. I mean, I do like personally kind of keep my own like unofficial SLA. Like, I would prefer to at least leave some comment on someone's PR that's sent my way within 24 hours. I think that's reasonable. But you can't like force yourself to hold that. And I would also say that, you know, to the point of the people that are working full time on this, I think almost everyone that's working full time on Kubernetes, they have not been assigned to work full time on engaging with PR reviews and things like that. And so they're almost sort of still donating their time to go do these things because they're not really getting any serious credit for that at work or anything like that. They still have things that they're expected to do during their work time that really don't have anything to do with that. But most of the people in the community really do a great job with that. I think we just have a few that have far too much sent their way, and it's just it's not possible. And the answer to that is not making somebody owe it more, but spreading the load more.
And I think that this program right here is an example of that. I don't know if anybody here is, I mean, I kind of am paid to do this, but I don't know, I don't know if anybody else really is, you know, so mentorship and growing the community and being that helpful guide is stuff that some people don't necessarily have to, if you will, in quotes, do. So it's just important to note that, I think. So echo what Ben said.
It's also good that somebody at some point recognized that we as a project need to develop programs like this on purpose now, so that in the future we're basically investing in ourselves at this point, right? In our future selves and the people that we're going to come in. So like +1.
So I'd echo a couple of things there. I definitely like that Ben threw out a number. I am going to try within 48 hours. It's hard within 24, so I sort of have 48. And I think that also is, whatever your number is, it's important as a professional to have some sense of that. We all get overwhelmed in our email, but to be able to back that up with tools and things, so you're sorting and filtering, and you're noticing, okay, this bucket is getting too full of stuff that I'm not getting to. Maybe this is actually a place that I need to start delegating because I'm going to get burned out. That sometimes our inbox is the leading indicator on other things. So there's that. And then I also I think something that Ben kind of got onto, and also Ruben, the idea just around empathy. It's also important for contributors and folks new to open source to understand that within whatever this hierarchy is, as you get towards maintainership or leadership types of roles, that you do become more busy, and it's easy for things to potentially fall through the cracks. There's a talk on YouTube by somebody in a different community describing their maintainership and how they get multiple thousands of emails a week, and there still may be 1,000 threads of discussion with 1,000 people. And then one of those people comes up to them at a conference and is like, hey, are you going to merge my PR? And they're like, who are you? Which conversation is that? Like, so there's a lot going on, and it's important to realize that people may be overtaxed, and is the person coming in to be empathetic to that, and think about, like, how can I engage in a way that's a light touch and efficient, and is also considerate to that person's time, recognizing that they're busy, and I may not be their biggest priority. But to also, I would say, stick with it, because we're all better together. So if you don't get a response immediately, I mean, something might have happened, and you never know. I mean, each of us has things that happen outside of work and life as well that takes us away from the project or from work. And you may be hounding somebody who's having a major life crisis or something like that. And it's important to have that empathy aspect there.
I definitely agree. And I think it does come right back to not just regarding burnout, but being able to set boundaries for yourself and set boundaries for other people, and being open about them.
Good answers. All right. So now we have a technical question in the Meter Contributors Slack channel from M. Singh. They would like to know which packages, libraries, modules, not sure what they're called in Go, does every software engineer, regardless of special interest group, have to interact with / understand for the project?
Waiting for Ben to say test.
I mean, so hopefully not. Hopefully not everyone has to necessarily understand that. I'm sure it happens quite a lot. I don't think there's necessarily one. I think this project is so wide, especially once you start to consider things like all of the different sub-projects and things, that nobody really, I think that's the real thing. People often think like, oh, you must know like all the tests or something. reality is there's just too much, and I don't think anybody actually knows all of it, and that's okay. We collectively know it.
What about some that are like larger themes? Maybe not across all special interest groups, but
I would say Client Go
okay.
is used by many different SIGs.
Anybody else?
+1.
I could see if you're looking for a particular deep dive into something unique and technical, protobus and gRPC is an interesting sub area with a lot of complexity.
Ruben, you've got your thinking face on there.
No, I do agree with Client Go. Like, I think that's pretty much across the board. Like, and it's got a lot of let's say nuance to it. So from version to version as well. So I think that is something very good to know. If you know it well, like it can become very useful and practical in a number of different verticals.
I think one of the things that I find interesting in the question is talking about software engineering. And for me, it's maybe less about the packages and libraries and modules, but recognizing that that is a broad discipline, that it's not just about implementing as an individual contributor a particular line item, but you're part of something bigger here, a software engineering lifecycle that includes documentation and test and building the infrastructure that backs that. And all of this gets wildly complicated on a project like Kubernetes, where it's a distributed system that operates as a cluster. So there's more than just your lines of code. There's a lot bigger picture that is a really good engineer, you're going to pay attention to that bigger picture as well.
Totally agree. At least from my point of view, the concepts and the designs are a lot more important than the particular bits of code. You know, if you want to work on some particular area, you're going to wind up drilling into that code. But to work on any of the areas, you kind of need to understand some of the concepts behind Kubernetes. Like, for example, that most things work by you specify, this is what I'd like things to look like in some declarative format, and then something else will pick that up and try to make the world look like that is kind of core to Kubernetes and how everything works. And understanding that, I think, is a lot more crucial than like one particular part of the code base. However, if you do start working on it, Client Go is everywhere. I would echo that.
And maybe for anybody who hasn't seen it, the type of background and broader context that Ben was mentioning there, the Kubernetes Up and Running book, the first chapter, I think does a really great job of outlining some of those core tenets.
And anything else from Jeff or Ruben before we go on? Sort of related question. That's why I teed that up there. What were some challenges that you all faced in particular with learning a particular part of either the code base or the process? Like, what was your most challenging where you had to, I really need to learn more in either this area or study this more or examine this more?
So at least for me, like the hardest part was to know where to look at the code. Like that was like I knew the problem at hand and I knew where I had to solve it and what to do, but I could not find the pertinent code to save my life. I mean, it took a lot of conversations in the SIG, and so hopefully I have people, on Heptio helping me out, for this, but it was very challenging to find out where things move, because again, being such a big piece of software, not all the code is in the same place where you expect. Or things, for instance, like the website, that's a different repo altogether. So like you can spend half an hour trying to figure out where to fix things in the docs, and then it turns out it's a different repo. Same with Kubernetes release. Like you will figure everything is under the build thing, but it's not necessarily true. The release does their own thing, their own different thing. So like that was to me like the most jarring part was the fact I had to reconcile the fact that code that I needed to either code or docs that I needed to manipulate or either add or modify were not in the structure that my mental concept wasn't. And then like this is where the SIGs come very handy, because there will definitely people let you know where things are. So like like you say, hey, where do I put this particular build file? Oh no, that goes in that other repo, and that helps you, save a lot of headaches and splitting hairs.
A couple of places that I struggled as a newcomer was similarly the organizational stuff, but I would, for example, I didn't go look at the subdirectory hack because I'm thinking, oh, that's advanced stuff, not for me. But then there's some important stuff that you might use almost regularly in there, or that gives you context on things. And also on the release team, there was a magic subdirectory of documentation called ephemera. And I thought initially, oh, that's just random other bits, but there's a few things that are important there. And then sometimes you go to the SIG and ask a question and they say, oh, are you following that thing from ephemera or hack or whatever the equivalent is? And like, we really ought to delete that so people don't fall into the same trap. So we have, in all open source projects, I would say we have varying degrees of self-documentation of our processes and where things are, the layout, and it can be very confusing. But especially as a newcomer, if you experience that confusion, raise your hand and articulate it, and hopefully that turns into your first PR to change and improve the situation.
PRs accepted. Ben, you go.
Yeah, just exactly. It's such a huge project again that like knowing everything, if you run into something, you're like, this is hard. I don't know where this is. More often than not, it's better to just say, this is probably this SIG. Let me reach out to some folks who probably do know this, and not spend days wandering through rabbit holes. I've had that a few times, and definitely if you just reach out within, for example, Slack, and ask the community, they're generally like very willing to help. If you have something related to testing and you come into our chat and ask, if I don't know it, I'm going to at least point you to someone who does. And I'd say pretty much all the SIGs are great about doing that. And that's the real route to go.
Yep. I think, yes, 100% agree. Like, I think that the point also that I would like to, I guess, not like an ancillary thing is the fact that, like, if you feel that, like this is very daunting, you're feeling frustrated because you're not understanding this thing, it's like, don't make that like to be like a punitive against yourself, like, because even people with a lot of experience in the project sometimes get in these loops themselves, like, because there might be undocumented tribal knowledge for a particular SIG or a particular vertical. And like, it doesn't matter what skill of a software engineer you are, like, unless you have that information, like, you might spend unnecessary amounts of time and very frustrating times trying to figure something out. So just, I think that the main emphasis is like, don't use, just because you feel lost, especially if this is your first contribution, like, if you feel lost in the code, like, don't take that against yourself. Don't make it about yourself. Just, try to find somebody, whether it's in Kubernetes, in the Slack, the general channel, or somebody can point you to a SIG that particular area of expertise, and just, like, do it as a discovery thing, right? Like, I hate to use the word adventure, but like, or journey. Like, don't see it as I cannot figure out where to put the doc, so I suck at this, right? Like, I know it's easy for us engineers to be very self-punishing and very like a imposter syndrome and all that stuff, and especially in a huge project like Kubernetes, this is very, very easy to happen. So like, just don't be hard on yourself. Reach out to people, and you'll be guided towards a possible solution or a possible area where you can actually get this done.
I'd like to add, like, I view programming as art, and oftentimes when I am like working on PRs, I feel like I'm finger painting on top of Mona Lisa, but it's still helping me get better as a person. So don't feel bad if you're also feeling the same way. You will get reviews, you will get comments and critiques, but they will help you both in your PR and to become a better programmer.
What did you think was the most challenging part of your onboarding, especially maybe from a technical perspective, Jeff?
Golang. Like, I am a polyglot when it comes to languages. However, Golang is like, I can read it and understand it, and then it takes me forever to fully like understand how streamlined people can code in it. So just getting up to speed in learning more about Golang was the hardest thing for me. And even still, like I have a PR hanging because I'm using a bool and not a struct, and it is currently, you know, taking up 8 bytes instead of 0 in memory. You know, like that sort of thing. Those nuances you're not going to learn and you're not going to know unless, you know, you're that embedded into it. So
Well, we're here for you if you need to vent about your constructs, okay? We're here. Feel free to chat with us. All right, I am fishing for more questions for you all. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions for each other?
I am actually curious how everybody got into Kubernetes. Maybe
Yeah.
not necessarily as a contributor, but like, we'll say a consumer first. Because I'm curious if like this is my answer is the same for Bob because we both got into it together. So I'm curious if our path was similar or kind of off in the weeds.
So I guess I'll go first. So like I was actually at the time I was working with Rackspace for in the OpenStack advocacy type of thing, and I actually was at OSCON in 2014, and like Kubernetes had just been released like a month before that, and this was when obviously Docker was like all the rage, right? Like Docker was amazing and everything, and so and it just so happens that while Austin was going on, there was a meetup at the New Relic offices there in Portland, and you know we went there as a group, all the Rackspace folks that we were at the booth, whatever, and showed up, and it turns out that Kelsey Hightower it was there giving a demo about this thing that I never ever heard of, you know, like oh this Kubernetes thing, and then he gave like a live demo, you know, like he did some crazy things with back then the early versions of Kubernetes, and you know, lo and behold, things work. And you know, we were like, as soon as that demo was done, we were talking to ourselves like, okay, how do we use this? Let's start learning it. So like that was my first exposure to Kubernetes was in 2014, July 2014, and we got through it through a you know through the user group in Portland.
Anybody else? Ben, why don't you take it?
Sure. So I think it was like early 2015. I was still in college. I was very interested in open source, and I wound up deciding I wanted to do Google Summer of Code, and I was interested in system stuff. And I looked around and I found this Kubernetes project. It wasn't at 1.0 yet, and they had a couple of things they wanted worked on, and one of them was they had this user space proxy that was connecting everything together. They wanted to make the kernel do it, and this Tim Hocking guy at Google had this cool idea to use IP tables. It's like, want someone to work on it. So I applied, and they accepted. So I worked on that summer. And even back then, the community was just pretty awesome, and it was a cool project. So about 2 years later, when I graduated, I applied to Google, and I wound up, luckily, someone noticed that and said, no, let's put them on a team that does Kubernetes stuff. And I've been doing that for about a year. And again, I would just say like probably the biggest draw for me beyond the interesting software is just that this is a really excellent community. This is a community that has some people like Paris and George who work on this full time to make sure that we have a friendly, active community. And that makes it an awesome project to work on.
Bless your little heart. I was actually going to ask you a GSOC question, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Yes, and Kubernetes does participate in Google Summer of Code. For all of those who are listening, yes, we are now done with our, or rounding out the summer, so catch us next summer for those that are listening for that. And then Tim, what about you?
So I guess my path here is long and torturous, and it goes back to probably 1995 as a student of computer science, and back when there were modems, these things that talk over the phone so computers can talk to each other and they make screechy noises. And my modem was 2400 baud, and I had to do homework on the school's, I guess they were mainframes, and it was slow and it was painful, and there were like 9600 baud modems if you were lucky enough to dial in. And I bumped into this thing called Linux, which meant I could do my Unix homework at home. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So that kind of launched me off on this path of playing around with Linux and the kernel device drivers, got me into systems work then once I'd graduated. And then a couple of years ago, I was working at Intel at the time in a team that was doing some things to try to kind of address this perception in the industry that virtual machines are slow and that they're legacy, because Intel has put a bunch of hardware in support of those. And this containers thing was happening, and people are asking this question of why containers versus VMs. And one of the common answers was VMs are slow. So we're doing a number of things to look at, well, can you orchestrate VMs and containers together? Can you make VMs fast? And one of the things that came out of our department was the clear containers, which became Kata containers. And another less known thing was a thing called the Cloud Integrated Advanced Orchestrator. We wrote our own orchestrator back, we think we started in 2015 in Go, and that was my first exposure to Go. We're playing around with VMs and containers and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. But at some point, I kind of recognized that maybe this Kubernetes thing was taken off, and rather than fighting it on some other project, that this was the one that was going somewhere, and I should kind of get with that. And like Ben said, as I started engaging in the community, just the people made it that much more worthwhile. There's a lot of really cool technology stuff going on. It's awesome to be part of, but then the people being welcoming and supportive, making it that much easier and fun. So it's been awesome.
George, why don't you say how you got involved?
Yeah, I had a friend, his name was Chuck. He was a former coworker of mine. Chuck, what's his last name? Sorry, Chuck. And he was like, hey, check this out. I'm going to show you something cool. You know containers, right? I was like, yeah, I know containers. It's a blob. I get it. And he's like, so go to this URL. It's on my laptop. And I typed in, 10 dot whatever it was. And then he's like, are you on it? Are you on it? Okay, I'm going to kill some things now. And then he turns around his laptop, shows me killing a bunch of stuff. And he's like, keep hitting F5 on your browser. And I was like, okay, got it. And it worked and everything. And I was like, oh, I remember doing this when I was assistant admin in college. Everyone kind of does this load balancer thing or whatever. He's like, yeah, but this is for containers and it's kind of generic and for everybody. So you don't have to build this from scratch anymore. And I was like, that is the holy grail. Like ops people have been looking for their whole life, like without having to make your own custom thing or all that stuff. And then at scale, I think the next year, Tim Hawking gave a talk before 1.0. And he was talking about, at the time, Kubernetes didn't scale at all past I think it was 100 nodes or whatever. And Tim's talk was like, this is why we're not worried about that. Like we know the work that needs to be done there. But what we're working on is like more of an API thing, not that, right? Like all that stuff kind of comes later. And I think we also kind of get bent around Kubernetes as like an orchestrating container thing that like what it really is a common set of APIs to do the stuff that people want. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is it. This is the one. And I found myself trying to find every excuse I could to work on that, and eventually got an opportunity to be here. So I like love, nothing makes me happier to see when other people get that moment, whether they're doing their first deployment or when you go in and kill nodes under, like I like to show people and then kill nodes without telling them, and then it's like, hey, I just removed half the infrastructure and you didn't even notice. Like to watch people like understand how that actually helps them. I could relive that moment like every day. It's as an ops person, it makes me happy. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
Like good stories. I like story time. Thanks, Jeff, for that question there. So we only have a few minutes left. I actually do have a couple more questions. So this one, I'm sure Ben will most likely jump in first. It's a testing related question. It's what's PROW and why should they care?
Oh boy. So I would say my team, previous to me being on it, we were sort of, so Google's one of the groups that kind of like bootstrapped the project, I guess would be a rough, fairish approximation. And at some point someone said, we need testing, and threw up a Jenkins somewhere and was like, this is fine. And over time, all the tests became containerized, and someone realized, hey, Kubernetes runs containers. Why are we maintaining a whole bunch of VMs somewhere to run containers when we can do that with Kubernetes? So PROW is a couple of things. One of those is running the tests for Kubernetes by using Kubernetes. The other thing is a variety of project automation things. things so that you can automate various GitHub things. A big thing we run into is that we like to label things in the project and say like, oh, this is an approved thing, or this is the SIG or something. But in order to let people edit labels on GitHub, you have to give them write permissions to the repo, which is crazy. So instead we have bot commands and automation to do that. It's in the test infra sub repo of Kubernetes. And if you'd like to take a look some more, if you look up the username, I have a post about it with a few more details.
The post is awesome. I was actually hoping we could like maybe even have some time to do like a little screen share, but we do not have time for that. So Ben, repeat that one more time. Repeat where people can get this because it's an amazing resource.
We also have docs and test info.
But it's so good. I love the little drawing at the top. It's so good.
It's thentheelder.io/posts/prow. And that hopefully is a good quick intro.
Yes, it is definitely.
Do you usually hang out at the channel, the SIG testing channel?
I am in SIG testing. I'm in SIG Contribex. But if you want to talk about testing things, you can find me very quickly in the SIG testing Slack.
Yes, awesome. All right, and then for the like, why should they care part? Like, what would a new contributor need to know, like right off the bat about Prow or maybe any of the CI or workflow stuff that we have?
I would say the biggest thing is knowing that there are these various commands you can use, which I'm going to send in the Slack. And we have some live generated details at that link where you can say, what is this repo and what can I do in it? And who can use it? Those are super useful. Other than that, hopefully contributors don't actually need to know much about Prow. It's just, there's tests, they're posted. It's like having Travis or something. And then we have these chat op commands so that you can do various things. So hopefully they just need to know about the chat ops.
So if they're getting a message that they're failing tests, how do they troubleshoot it?
Well, there should be a link to a page that displays the results. And if you're having trouble understanding, going to SIG testing is a good starting point. If we're not necessarily the most familiar with that test, we can usually point you to the SIG for which the test is. Hopefully, a lot of them, it will tell you like, oh, this test case failed, and there will be logs. But again, if you don't understand that, coming and talking to us is a good starting point.
All right. And then last question, any SIGs or working groups that you work with looking for new contributors? This is your 30-second plug for work that needs to be done in your SIG and welcoming other people. Who wants to start?
Hi. SIG UI is currently, would love more people. We're currently trying to do an Angular migration from one version of Angular to the other. And that's taking up a lot of people's time. So SIG UI, if you know Angular and or Go, you can definitely help out.
I think
here we all thought that it was just Go that you needed to know, you know? Who would have thought? Go ahead, Ben, I'm sorry.
I think every SIG wants people to come help. We want more people all the time, always. I'd love to see you helping with contributor experience or testing or really any SIG. And there's always work to do. If you can't find work, come ask the SIG. Again, Slack is a great way to do that. But other than that, on GitHub, there are help wanted and for new contributors labels. And I know I and some other folks have been trying to push for actually using those and particularly marking things as this is for new contributors. And those are GitHub-wide concepts. So hopefully you'll find those pretty commonly and you can look for some issues that say, you know, this, we think this is a good one for someone starting off.
I would like to echo Ben's sentiment. I think it is like right now there's more work than there's people to do it. And this is across SIGs. And, you know, like any contributions are very welcome. So like whether it's docs, whether is, in fact, sometimes it is very helpful just to, if you happen to know a particular area or if you, let's say that you have experience from your work and you have answers to things. Just being in the Slack channel and answering questions, that is very, very helpful. Even if you never contribute one line of code, that is incredibly valuable, like for the community. Like I've seen people answering questions in Slack channels that to my own questions, and like they're not necessarily the maintainers, or they're necessarily in the SIG. They just happen to know, because they themselves have been caught by certain issues before, or they point me out to other places. So like, like they're like the unsung heroes, so to speak. And, like I would like to thank those people who do that. Use this opportunity to thank them for that. But especially if you just want to get acquainted with the community, with a particular SIG, just, pinging in the channel and answering questions, like that is incredibly helpful. So I think that's my plug will be for, like plug is just basically, if you are a new contributor, you're an aspiring contributor, just go into the SIG that you feel more, like not empathy, that you feel more attuned with. Maybe you're a specialist in storage, you go to SIG storage, or you're a network specialist, go to SIG network, and try to help people there. Like just, answer questions and, like be helpful, and, like you'll become noticed, and, people will like, say, oh, that person in the Slack, they're really good, or whatever. So like, it's a great way to create a rapport in that particular community. And, I think it's just the best way, and the lowest cost, and the lowest path, and the least path of resistance towards becoming an actual, like a code, or let's say code or documentation contributor. Before that, the easiest path for that would be just to be in a channel and participate in the community.
All right, and I'm about to get kicked out of my room. It is top of the hour. Tim, do you want to have a really super quick plug about maybe SIG release or anything like that?
To echo what the other folks have said, like Ruben, it's kind of a frequently asked question. As a new contributor, what should I work on? Well, obviously the first pass is what do you have an affinity for? But if you're looking more broadly at the project, SIG release and the release process, if you're a skilled software engineer who's done releases, things like that, understand project management, documentation, contributor experience as well. Those are areas where people can get involved broadly and get some sense of things across the scope of the project. And maybe that then gives them a sense of where to dive in more detail on something specific too.
Great. Awesome session today, y'all. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated. For those that are listening to either live or the recording, we do this once a month, first Wednesdays of the month. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel if you'd like to get alerts. That's the best way to keep up to date with live streams and meetings and SIG meetings and meetings. And thanks again to the panel. And I will see you all on Slack, I'm sure. Thank
Thank
much.
you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.